Well. So, lately there has been a lot of talk about force feedback, for a good reason. And I have quite a bit of experience on the subject, having owned the Rhino, which you still can't see, it's right there, for about 18 months now. So, I thought I'd take this opportunity to kind of look into force feedback. First of all, why you should be excited. Spoiler, you should. And then I'd like to go through some caveats you need to understand before making purchase decisions. And since I have had this Rhino for 18 months now, maybe it's time for an 18 months retrospective on that. Okay, so let's start with why should you be excited about force feedback? Well, obviously because it has returned now. You can be excited. There's a lot of good reason to be excited about force feedback because, well, not right now, but you can actually get your hands on a lot of force feedback soon. The Rhino is still available. There's several months of lineup to get one, I believe. I'm not sure. But there are also several new force feedback devices on the way, like Winwing has one. Then there's the Moza one, or mozzarella. I'm kind of trying to cut weight right now, so I can't help but think about mozzarella when I hear that thing. And I believe Virpil has announced one. Then there's the FFB, and I'm sure VKB can't be that far behind. And I believe that even Thrustmaster must be scrambling to get something out of the door, so that can't be further than, let's say, 15 years away. So, force feedback is on the way. And why? Well, you are not looking at the main reason why. VP Force started this craze. Of course, force feedback has existed for a long time now, but it kind of died away in the early 2000s for a number of reasons. One of them was that you couldn't get a fantastic grip combined with a force feedback base, but now you can, and you could for a while, and people are loving it, so force feedback is now here probably to stay. And that is a fantastic thing. Why, you might ask yourself, and well, that's a good question. So let's go through, there are like, I'd say 3 main reasons why you need to be excited about force feedback. Number 1. It feels fantastic. I have tried out most of the joystick bases like Cougar, bleh, Warthog, bleh, and then the VKB Gunfighter, Virpil, Mongoose, and I tried the Winwing Libra or whatever that is. And those are kind of fine, and they are great improvement over the previous systems. But they are very springy. It feels like you are fighting against a spring, and I don't want to knock on that stuff. Like, they are really good and I enjoyed using them. And I had a lot of fun using them, so they're great stuff, but they are not these. So basically, if you've noticed, all of those manufacturers nowadays offer some kind of dampers. And that's a great thing, because the dampers are intended to reduce the feeling of springiness in your stick. Because you don't want to feel like you are stepping on a trampoline when you are trying to fly a plane. Now, I tried all kind of dry clutches, and I have a hydraulic damper on my pedals, and that's kind of nice. Yeah, it's pretty good. But I never found a dry clutch I could actually use, because I'm completely totally allergic to stiction. Maybe that's just me, but I'm not the only one. And I didn't test any of those with the Nyogel thing. I've heard that's great, and it might be. But I never found any of the joystick dampers to be satisfactory. Well, I don't know how to put this, but let's just say it this way. Recently, for the last year or so, I've mostly flown this thing, right, like here. The F-18 and some F-16 and other stuff. And the F18 actually should have some feedback in the stick, but it doesn't. So it's basically just a normal stick. Except that it's a really excellent stick, so that's the first point. The feel of the Rhino is absolutely sublime. It's incredibly good. I've added some dampening, and it's basically impossible to feel any stiction at all, because it doesn't exist. I mean, it's still a mechanical thing, so yeah, sure, you can have some feel of the mechanism like you probably would have in the real plane, but it's very subtle, and when you add stuff like damping, it's basically perfect because it's done in software. And usually the problem with dry clutches is that the static friction you need to outcome before the stick starts moving becomes a problem. And when the damping is done in software, there is no static friction because it only starts damping once the stick starts moving. So there's absolute zero breakout force in this. I can't make out the point where the stick starts moving at all. So this is absolutely phenomenal performance from a stick. And for me, this is the number one thing. Like, this is probably not anything like you would expect of a force feedback device. Now, the whole name force feedback, it comes from the Microsoft Windows and other Microsoft stuff, force feedback interface, which is used to drive these things. And it's not that descriptive of what's going on here. And I don't have a better term for it, so I'm going to continue using force feedback. But it's important to realize that what you might think of as force feedback, like vibrations when you shoot guns and stuff, that's only a tiny fraction of what these devices actually do. So the first point is, this feel of the stick is just absolutely sublime. It's incredibly good. It's better than anything I have ever tried before. It's the best joystick I've had. And there's a reason why I'm in the DCS F18 right now, because it has no force feedback at all. It is just a stick. And just by being a stick, this is the best stick I've ever had. Now, I'm going to come back to this a bit later, because there is software that will give you all kinds of effects on any plane pretty much, but like I said, I'll come back to that later when it comes to the points about which force feedback device you should choose. But for now, just understand that this is the best stick or the best base I have. Well, it's the best stick also, I love this. It's the VKB MCGU. The stick is fantastic, but the base is by far the best one I have ever tried. And that is when there is no force feedback in classic sense going on at all. It is just amazing. So that's reason number one. And the reason number two is going to be modifiability and the ease of it. So a couple of years ago I tested all the different bases like the Virpil VKB Winwing, and you can switch the cams around, change the springs, or do all that stuff, which is all fine and good. And of course you can add the clutches. But my fingers are still probably bleeding from when I switch all those cams and springs and all that stuff. It's hard work actually. It's really annoying, and you won't do it very often, realistically. Now, if you have a force feedback device like this, first of all, the adjustability is, again, absolutely phenomenal. You can do anything you want with it, absolutely anything. You can just change the response curve, make it anything you want. You don't need to install gimbals, you just go to software and do, well, like you normally would, would adjust the stick curve in game, but now you can actually adjust the force you feel when you move the stick. Then you can add like software limiters to adjust the travel amount, and like I do, I add some damping, friction, breakout force, whatever you want basically, just in software. And the sheer amount of adjustability is incredible, and the ease of it is even far more incredible. And I'm going to show you a magic trick now. So I've been flying this Hornet pretty happily here with my amazing stick, which by the way goes pretty limp when I'm not in anything. Now I can only feel the damping effect. So let's do a magic trick. I'm not touching a stick, I'm not doing anything with the software. So let's just pick an instant action. Is there a helicopter in here? That is a helicopter. And like I said, the software adjustability is phenomenal. But this could be even better. Let's wait for the thing to load up a bit. I don't want to have a catastrophe on my hands when I click fly, so let's go.
Welcome to Kutasi Air Base. You are cleared to take off.
Okay, so what you do here, you go to adjust controls. Let's find the cyclic stick. Then I have the force trim here. And then we find the grip, which is VKB gunfighter. And this should be one we are looking for. I have changed this configuration a little bit. So I'll have to rebind these.
You may fly
But
the
anyway.
flight plane to Hawk Expeditionary Airfield or venture anywhere you wish. Your kneeboard card provides
The real magic
information
here
on
is
the flight
that,
plan
like I said, the
as well as
software
the
is incredible and the
you may
adjustability,
encounter along the way.
but I don't even have to use the software. I just load it up into different, well, not different plane, this is a helicopter, and now I have an Apache stick. I did nothing myself. The game does all the work. So what happens now is I click the trim switch, and I only have basically the damping effect now. And if I accelerate, I feel like this is the nice new center point for the stick. I release the force trim switch and there we go. This is helicopter functionality right here, and I did nothing. The game itself did all the work and the stick obliges, and this is part of the magic of adjustability. I just load up another plane and the stick is now something completely different. It acts in a completely different way. Like that. So the second point is adjustability. And that's another real biggie. And notice that I still haven't even gotten into what people actually consider as force feedback traditionally. Because I think actually those nice effects, although how nice they are kind of secondary to everything else you get. Because just having the best possible stick base ever and the fantastic adjustability, those are just such big features for any kind of controller. So those were points 1 and 2. So just the feel and the adjustability both are absolutely phenomenal on this thing. And probably, possibly, other force feedback devices as well, but I haven't tested any of those, so I don't know. So the third point. Well, this is kind of part of it right now, right here, right now. As you notice, I'm trimming the helicopter and then I release and the stick stays where I leave it. And this is not just the best way, but it's the only way to fly helicopters. This is how they work in reality. And that's something you only get with force feedback, really. You can do this with dry clutches. I'm assuming that you can, because like I said, I'm completely allergic to stiction. And when I tried this with dry clutches without the Nyack gel thing, the feeling of stiction was insanely bad. But that's partially probably me. So I don't want to knock on dampers too much, or the dry clutches, or especially hydraulic dampers. They might be just fine. However, if you have a stick that stays where you put it, like this does now, well, that's just part of the equation, because I can still move this. I can feel spring forces now. This is the new center point. It works like a normal stick around that center point. I can maneuver the helicopter pretty nicely around it, no problems. Just like I normally would. It's only when I do some really drastic changes that I need to start maneuvering without the centering, and then find the new center point. And then I can use it as a normal stick around that center point. So even if you have what is known as the helicopter setup without any springs, that will only be a part of the story. The only real way to do this is with a force feedback device. And I can tell you that this alone, if you fly helicopters to any amount, this alone is worth something. A lot. This is actually quite amazing, but let's jump to the next thing. Let's go to the more traditional force feedback stuff. Because I think this is basically what people think about when they think about force feedback. I think I don't want the open cockpit, thank you. Well, it's fine. Let's lower this a bit, maybe. Or not, anyway. So, when you think about force feedback, you are expecting your stick to start shaking all the time and give you all kind of effects and feedback, and well, yeah, that is what they do, undoubtedly. I'll give you the best example right here. If you can see what's happening. If I try to pull too hard, I can feel the plane vibrate. So that's simple. Also, when I'm closer to stall speeds, I can feel the spring force diminish And I can feel what the plane is doing. Now it wants to stall up. The stick is very light all the time here. I can feel how my control surfaces are gripping the airflow or not actually gripping. And that is also simply fantastic. And I absolutely love that feature too. So as you saw with the Apache and now with the Spitfire, also I don't have a lot of effects in here active right now. Because, well, I'll get back to this a bit later, but the only effects DCS gives you in the Spitfire is that stall. And of course the diminishing feel of airflow. And increasing, of course. But that is all that DCS gives you. Like I said before, there's other software that can give you better stuff, more stuff, but I'll get back to that later. For now, I just wanted to show you all these three main aspects of force feedback. And this is the third one. And I'm not saying this isn't super cool. And for helicopters it's almost necessary. I really don't want to fly a helicopter without force feedback ever again. But I believe in order of importance, the main factors why you need to be interested in force feedback and excited about it is because, first of all, it's the best feeling stick base I've ever used by far. The adjustability is outstanding, like insane. And then you get all these super nice and useful effects on top. Those are the three main features why you should be excited about this. And like I said, you should be. Because this is a real revolution to flight simming hobby right now. And I think the credit goes to VP Force because they started it. They started the modern craze by offering a somewhat affordable base that works really well. So kudos to them and welcome to all the new companies making force feedback stuff. And yeah, basically, if you are now opening your wallet, throwing money at your screen in order to get your own force feedback stuff, I totally understand you. That's what I wanted to do some time back, and I did. But there's something important I did before. And basically I did my homework. I checked out the early adopters' reviews on the Rhino. And that's something I strongly suggest you do too. Because of a couple of important reasons. So, first of all, the number one first reason, of course, let's just say that all the other caveats apply. By this point, if you are considering buying this kind of expensive hardware, you probably have experience on other hardware before. So you know all these things about build quality, durability, all these important questions which apply to force feedback. What I want to tell you now is stuff that is specific to force feedback and which you might not be aware of. So the first important point. I think this is going to be another 3-pointer again, maybe. But the main first point you need to pay attention to is a thing called cogging or anti-cogging. On a normal stick that only has basically springs and cams, or just springs even. Those are pretty nice, they work the way they work, and they just work. Now, in force feedback, you have motors. And these are actually in-runner brushless motors down there. So those work by having, I believe in-runners had electric coils on the outside and magnet bars in the middle, and they mesh a bit like this. And to make the motors move, the magnets are energized in specific order and they flip the magnets like this. And the problem is that the magnets want to flip in very discrete specific steps. And you can imagine why that can be really, really bad. So what happens in the firmware, I believe, is a black magic called anti-cogging, which adjusts the electric fields in a way that makes the joystick give you a smoother response. And basically, if I power off the Rhino right now, there's a big red button. I'm not going to actually do that because DCS might not like that. But if I did that, you would see that the stick turns into horrible shit instantly. It's going to be bumpy, a lot like this. And the movement is going to happen in really discrete steps. And the feel is going to be terrible. That is because the more powerful the motors are, the more you are going to feel the cogging. And I would say that the Rhino without anti-cogging is unusably bad as a joystick base. But if you enable the anti-cogging and all the other magic this stick does, because there is a lot of magic actually going on in the software. All those things that come naturally to cams and springs have to be meticulously programmed in software. And yeah, that's the point number one. And that's something you need to really look out for. And in normal sticks, that's basically a given. In force feedback, it is not. It is absolutely not. And the problem is that if anti-cogging and other magic, like for example the stick actually, when it senses that you are trying to move it, it tries to help you a bit to overcome the friction inside the mechanism. There's all kinds of software magic going on down there. And if that software magic is not done properly, and it's probably not easy to do, the stick base can be absolutely horrible. Like unusably bad. And this is an important point. I'm not saying that the upcoming, any of those upcoming force feedback bases are going to be bad. No. I have no experience on them and I only expect them to be pretty good, actually. And I'm looking forward to the force feedback revolution happening and going faster and faster. But that is definitely something you have to watch out for. And it's kind of a make or break feature on a force feedback stick. So definitely look out for that. And basically, what you want to hear in a review is somebody telling you how horrible the stick is without the motors energized. And then them telling you that the stick is excellent with the motor energized. Because first of all, if somebody tells you that it feels horrible and clunky without the software, at least you know that the dude doesn't have a bunch of limp dicks for fingers and he can do that. Can actually feel horrible clogging. So that's like a insurance that the person doing the review knows what they are talking about. And then you want to hear, really want to hear that the stick becomes completely smooth after you enable the software. So that's what you want to watch out for in a review. And of course, the manufacturer should tell you or reassure you about their anti-cogging features, that they are really paying attention to that because it's important. But again, you've bought hardware before, so you know that the manufacturers can tell you anything and it doesn't necessarily mean all that much. So number one point, anti-cogging. It's incredibly important and you need to pay attention to it because if it's done badly, it's going to pretty much ruin the base and make it unusable. Okay, so the second point. Now this is a little bit more complicated, and it's also something very specific to force feedback. So if you have experience in audio hardware, you probably know what watts are, and you already probably know where this is going. Well, force feedback has watts too, but force feedback mostly talks about what you do with the watts, and those are going to be Newton meters, which tell you how strong the base is. So Newton meters basically tell you the torque, which means how much resistance the stick can give you. And the Rhino, I think this is basically what's becoming the baseline of the modern force feedback generation. The Rhino is advertised as 9 Newton meter stick base. It basically means that if you have a 1 meter stick, the Rhino can give you 900 grams of pull. So that 1 meter is the 1 meter in Newton meters, and the 900 grams of pull is the 9 newtons. So in practice, what does that mean? Well, this is kind of basically the strongest stick I've ever used, but not by a wide margin. Normal sticks, like the VKB, Virpil, and Winwing ones, they are at their strongest with the biggest springs and avia cams. Especially the VKB rivals the Rhino in strength, but it has a massive ramp up, like at the edges. And usually the area you operate in the middle parts, it's actually lighter than this. So all in all, the Rhino pretty much at 9 Newton meters, it's kind of, I'd say, it's among the strongest bases when compared to the regular ones. And it seems that the 9 Newton meters is going to be kind of the baseline for the new generation. There are some, like the FFBs, that promise a lot more. But if you're wondering how strong it is, I'd say pretty much strong enough. Of course, if you want to use a really long extension on your stick, you really want a minimum of that 9 Newton meters, I'd say. And there are more points to the pure strength, but the more important point here is actually heat. Because when you have springs and cams, you can basically pull a stick up to a point and it will resist you and pull back indefinitely, basically, without any problems. The force feedback stick won't. Because to create that pulling force, trying to pull the stick back to the center, fighting you, giving you the nice feel, that requires power. And power generates heat. And the motors can't take infinite heat. In fact, magnets can't take very much heat at all. And that can be a problem. So, basically, one of the strengths of the Rhino is that when it starts overheating, it handles things pretty nicely, I'd say. So what happens is that a very annoying sounding fan kicks in. You are about to hear that, I suppose. It's kind of annoying, but no, not a deal breaker at all, especially if you are using headphones and flying a plane, which makes a lot of noise. So it's not that huge deal. I don't really like the sound of the fan, and it's really small and ineffective, so it's not great, but it does something. And in addition to that, when the Rhino starts heating more and more, it reduces the maximum forces. And at some point it's going to reach an equilibrium where it can basically hold that force indefinitely. And I'm about to do some testing to show you how that works, but first you need to understand that this is by no means a failure of the stick base. It's kind of expected nowadays for a force feedback device to start throttling down and overheating. And it may sound weird, but there's actually some pretty sound logic behind it. Like, imagine a race car, a Formula 1 car at the main straight of Fuji, for example. That's like 2 or 3 kilometers, I don't know which. And you are pedal to the metal racing down the main straight, trying to overtake somebody, and your engine is absolutely screaming at the rev limiter. Now, if you were to drive that fast for any period of time, your engine would blow up like pretty quickly. It sounds kind of bad, but that's how you want it, because if it didn't, you would be leaving a lot of untapped potential in there. You only need that kind of power in very specific situations. But when you need it, you need it. So basically for force feedback, you could design these devices to give you whatever strength they can indefinitely, almost. But then you would be leaving a lot of untapped potential on the top. Because realistically, you are only going to be pulling the stick hard or pushing or whatever in very specific situations. And this is one of those situations. This is a fly-by-wire modern jet. They can give you a lot of time for pulling and pushing and whatever. And because they are fly-by-wire, they won't stall by over-pulling. So you are going to do a lot of yanking and banking, a lot. And the other situation where you are going to be really pushing the stick, literally, is a Fokker DR1 or equivalent, because it's horribly out of trim and you can't trim that plane. It's only properly trimmed like in stratosphere, but since most of the time you won't be flying in stratosphere, you are going to be pushing it hard. And that's going to stress the stick a lot. Now, most of the things in between, your mileage will vary, but they generally won't overheat. Like, I have flown a lot of normal missions in Spitfires, F-16s, F-18s, F-15s, and during normal missions, even if you do dogfighting during those missions, the stick base doesn't tend to overheat at all. So that's why it's a good idea to kind of give you some of that extra on top. It's like afterburner. You won't be using afterburner all the time. But when you need afterburner, it's really good to have it. So that's the difference between indefinite power and momentary power. And I haven't really seen much data on the upcoming sticks, but they do give you some kind of Newton meter readings, which is fine. But the important question you need to ask is, what is the actual output of the stick? And what happens when it starts overheating? Because I have heard, I haven't tested myself, but certain products are said to overheat pretty quickly. And when they do, they go completely limp. They just shut down, basically. Now, I haven't tested these products, I won't name them. I've just heard about this, but apparently this can be a real big problem, which is why it's so important that you find this out before opening your wallet. Heat management can be a big problem, like a real actual game killer. Just like the cogging thing, overheating can kill this base, like literally. And one of the strengths of the Rhino is that it handles overheating so well. It does overheat, but when it happens, it's not a big deal. It still gives you enough strength for easily lying or flying your plane safely and comfortably. You feel the lessening in the strength, but it's not so bad. It's not ideal. I'd like it to hold maximum strength indefinitely, but I understand why it doesn't. So, when you're looking at these new force feedback offerings, of course, first read up on what the manufacturer tells you, and if they just tell you that yeah, it's going to give you this much power, it's not going to overheat, well, maybe it will. How do I know? But do ask the question, why doesn't it overheat? Why doesn't it give you that afterburner power when you need it? Why is it leaving so much potential untapped? Because that's a trade-off also. So basically be very careful about overheating, because that's one of the biggest features and biggest potential problems in force feedback. And I would really suggest letting someone bite the bullet before you, so that before ordering stuff or purchasing, spending lots of money, because these are kind of expensive things. Just let somebody else take that risk for you, and read up on some reviews and tests before taking the plunge. So I'll start flying these highly stressful scenarios here, and over there you should be able to see how the stick starts gathering heat. And for example, when I look at the Mosa base, it says that it's metal, which is great, because it should be able to dissipate heat through its body, which the Rhino can do. That's a definite advantage, I think. But also, it doesn't have a fan and it's a sealed device, so that's kind of, I don't know, I don't want to sound too negative about it. I have never tested it. It could be a perfect solution, but it's kind of question mark for me. Like, how can it dissipate heat without a fan and in a completely closed base? So can I really rely on that? And what happens when it overheats, or does it overheat? And again, I don't know, maybe it never overheats. I guess it's possible. But is it? I don't know. Again, let someone bite the bullet before you. I highly recommend that. Really. Like, people can get attached to lab rats, that's why we have hardware reviewers, so let some hardware reviewer get disappointed or take that risk for you. Now, I can't see what's going on in the stick base right now, but I'm fully expecting the temperatures to be going up because I'm pulling and yanking and banking so much. And that is normal. Notice how I'm starting and restarting this same dogfight all over again, because normally one dogfight isn't enough to overhit a Rhino. But I think this is totally valid. If you want to practice dogfighting, this is what you would do. It's not like a super extra specific stress or anything like that. It's just normal stuff. And now this guy isn't being very cooperative, so he's not overheating my stick as much as he should. And I think that's something you need to make notice of also, like how resistant to overheating the Rhino actually is. So I'm absolutely not knocking on the Rhino when I say that it overheats. It's expected, it's kind of, I think, unavoidable almost, until proven otherwise. Okay, I'll check how hot are we. 42 on my elevator. I would expect anything to start happening at maybe 50. And let's just do this for now. I'll show you what happens. Like, this AI guy isn't stressful enough to overheat the Rhino in 2 dogfights. It wouldn't be in 3, maybe 4. I have to really do this to show you how this works. But I think it's important to show you. Okay, that's it, I can hear the fan. The overheat protection is kicking in now. And what's happening now, first it's just I think the fans running. But as the temperature goes up, I'll start losing some strength in the stick. But notice how I'm even having trouble here. I have to accelerate this afterburning force feedback, fly-by-wire jet has trouble overheating the Rhino. But as you can see, the heat is going up definitely. And the Rhino will start reducing the maximum force. But this is perfectly flyable, totally comfortable, and so on. And like I said, I have no idea how the Moza or Winwing or Virpil or whatever FFB base handles overheating. I have absolutely no idea. I haven't even seen those things. But the thing I want to emphasize is that before buying any kind of force feedback device, please do find out how they handle heat. Because this is an absolute make or break thing. And like I said, basically only jets like this, like fly-by-wire jets overheat, and the Fokker DR1 and the likes overheat the stick. If you fly Spitfires and stuff, you usually only can use gentle enough input so that the stick won't heat up even during heavy dogfighting. Also, if you don't have fly-by-wire, you risk stalling jets even if they have a lot of power, or over-G'ing them. So you won't be pulling that hard. So it's actually only fairly specific circumstances where this overheating happens. And for example, if a device is mainly intended for general aviation use, it's a perfectly valid device, perfectly well designed, perfectly functional device, and it still could be completely unusable for this. So even something that is good and nice and functional could be unusable for this. I think that's really important to understand here. Of course, even a fly-by-wire jet, I'm going to run out of fuel if I keep pulling like that. So what I want you to take out of this is that overheating happens. It's an important factor for force feedback devices. And you need to take it into account. It's normal. And before making a purchase decision, you need to find out how that specific device handles overheating. If it overheats, it probably will. Because, like I said, it's kind of strange if a device like this doesn't overheat at all. Because that means that it's never going to give you as much power as it could. And most of the time that power is just positive and useful. And most of the time it will never overheat, even if it gives you all that extra power. So when a manufacturer of these devices is boasting like, yeah, our stuff never overheats, My question is why? Why not overheat ever? Like, why are you capping the power so low that it's never going to overheat? Like, the Rhino will reach a point. It reduces the strength so far that it won't overheat ever, basically. But most of the time it's going to be stronger than that. I can already feel that the power is returning. I'll take a quick peek. Yeah, we are at 55 now, so... Yeah, I can already feel the strength coming back, because I haven't been pushing or pulling on the stick for a while. So as you can see, overheating really isn't necessarily a problem. Just like Afterburner drinks all of your fuel. It's a trade-off, basically. So this is the second super important thing you need to think about when buying into force feedback. You have to find out how your devices or your potential devices overheating is handled. And again, I strongly suggest letting somebody else bite the bullet before you. Now, the third important consideration is software. I mentioned before, well, F18 should have some kind of weird feedback system based on AOA, but it doesn't. DCS F18 has no effects at all. So that's something you have to prepare for. Not every plane will have any kind of effects at all. Now it's almost a miracle that some do, because force feedback has been dead for so long. So we are basically lucky to have anything at all, natively. So DCS World, some planes have effects, some planes don't, many of them do. IL-2 planes have effects. Now, even a game as big as the Flight Simulator 2020, I believe that's what they call it, it has no force feedback support at all natively. None. I believe the new one will. They would be stupid to not, if you look at the market. Well, like, force feedback is going to be a big thing. A huge thing in the near future. So I'm pretty sure they will too. But for now you have to understand that to get any kind of support for the force feedback at all, you may have to rely on third-party software or the manufacturer's software. And that's another point where the Rhino absolutely shines. Its own software is incredible. It's like probably the best joystick software I have used for a long time. And then there is the Telem FFB, which is like the additional layer on top, an open source project that is intended to provide force feedback effects for games that don't have them. Like, this is native right now, totally native, no effects at all. But if I started up Telem FFB, I could add all kinds of interesting stuff, even on the F18 in DCS, which normally doesn't have anything like firing the gun or dropping bombs or anything. That could do stuff. Stalls maybe, and maybe even the pendulum things working on the stick. I don't know exactly what's available, and especially I don't know what's available in the future, because Telem FFB is a constantly evolving open source project. Now obviously I have absolutely no idea what the software is going to be like on any other manufacturer's products, because I have no idea. I can't have any idea. But that's another important point you need to consider before making the purchase. Have somebody find out for you. Read up on the early reviews and what the software is going to be like. because it's super important. Even much more important than on regular joysticks. Like, I usually don't use any kind of software on a regular joystick at all. Also, I don't have the Rhino software running all the time because it doesn't need to. It's nice that way. I just set up the stick, upload the settings, and that's it. Okay, now I hear the fans stopping, so now we have returned to normal state as far as temperature is concerned. So the software is another make or break thing, because if the stick's own software doesn't support, like Microsoft Flight Simulator probably explained, then you'll get no effects in those at all currently. And you'll get less effects in DCS planes and any other plane. And maybe that will change in the future as the force feedback revolution continues. But for now, you are kind of dependent on the manufacturer's software. So do keep that in mind. So these are the three main points you need to look out for. The anti-cogging stuff, it's like make or break. Like, it can be really bad. I don't know if it's going to be, I haven't tested any of those sticks. But it can be bad. You have to be sure that it's decent before you open your wallet. Then there's the overheating and strength. Now, the manufacturers will tell you what kind of Newton meters their products do. But I haven't seen much discussion about the overheating or what those Newton meters actually are. Is that the maximum available or sustained or what? I don't know. But that is a question you need to have answered before you buy anything, I think. Now, for some of you, $500 or euro stick base might not mean anything, but for many of us it's a lot of money, so be careful. And then there's the software. The software is kind of icing on the cake, and you can expect software to probably improve. And hopefully even the base situation with base support for basic force feedback is probably going to improve, hopefully, in the future. But for now you are kind of dependent on the manufacturer's software. Now as for the Rhino, well, it has withstood the test of time quite well, like something like 18 months by now. And the Rhino handles overheating pretty well. Like, well, most people aren't like super muscular superstars like me, so you might not want all that strength from your stick. I am kind of more power type of a guy, so when manufacturers advertise massive Newton meters, I kind of get excited and happy in my pants. But for most people the 9 Newton meters is enough or more than enough. It's only when you have super long extensions when it starts to be interesting. And you also need to figure out if your grip can handle that kind of load, because these are not designed for multiple kilos of pull. So the Rhino has enough strength for me for now, and its feel is amazing, the firmware is amazing, it doesn't cog, the anti-cogging is awesome, and the general feel is absolutely sublime. So that is a lot of perfect points for Rhino. As far as this thing is concerned, you don't have to worry about anti-cogging at all. So you can tick that box. Then there's the strength and heat management. And Rhino is strong enough for most purposes, easily. So that's good. And the heat management is basically pretty good. This is what you want from your force feedback device. It overheats only occasionally, if at all. But like I said, if a force feedback device doesn't overheat at all, you need to ask questions and make sure there's no hidden monsters in that system, because if it doesn't overheat at all, it's kind of a little strange to me. But with the Rhino, it doesn't overheat very easily, and when it does, it's not catastrophic, and it handles the overheating quite nicely. So those boxes are also ticked on the Rhino. And I've seen all kinds of joystick software in the recent years, and the Rhino is the best one I have seen. And the Telem FFB is awesome and constantly developing. So for the Rhino, those boxes are also completely ticked. Now of course it's impossible to figure out what the state of the art for force feedback devices is going to be, actually. But I think this is a good starting point. It's really good actually, but that's what is expected nowadays. But we'll basically just have to see. Now do note that I don't want to be raining on anyone's parade. I'm not knocking on products I haven't tested or even seen myself. I don't know if the Mosa or Windwing or Virpil or anyone else's stuff is good or not. I have absolutely no idea, and I don't want you to think that I'm even promoting the Rhino above them. Like right now, the thing that Rhino has going for it is that it's tested and it's known hardware and well and thoroughly tested. I have been playing with it for something like 18 months now, and it's been working perfectly for me, and it's really good. We know that. Now the upcoming competitors might be better, cheaper. Hopefully they are. Like, I want better stuff in the future. I'm looking forward to better stuff in the future. Like more power, less overheating, even better anti-cogging, all that stuff. Fine. Bring it. But I must emphasize that right now you have to ask all those important questions from any kind of force feedback device. So the anti-cogging thing, power, heat management and software. Make sure all of those are at least baseline okay before making the purchase. But other than that, welcome to the revolution, because in the like 30 or 40 years I've been flying simulators, this is one of the best things I've ever run into. Like, I was expecting everything from force feedback and it delivered. So I hope it does the same for you. So I wanted to kind of forearm you with this knowledge I have so that you can make reasonable purchases and enjoy your hardware. Now I need a drink and you need a rest from me. So thank you for watching, and maybe see you sometime. And I wish you the very best on your force feedback journey.